Hello, everybody. This is Professor Robert Alexander, and today we are going to lecture on Chapter 3. This is lecture number 5, y'all. We're getting along, and we're getting through the book at a good pace. Chapter 3 deals with female sexual responses, the sexual anatomy, and physiology. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. This is Chapter 3. Now, there are going to be times where I ask for you to pause the video and take a look at the diagram. Also, as always, you should have your notepad and a pen handy. As I'm speaking, you are taking notes. The more you write, the better you retain. All right. Chapter 3. So anatomically speaking, all of the embryos are female when the reproductive structures begin to develop. It does not receive certain genetic and hormonal signals. The fetus will continue to develop as a female if it does not receive certain genetic and hormonal signals. So in humans and in most mammals, the female, in addition to providing half of the genetic instruction for the offspring, provides the environment in which it can develop until it becomes capable of surviving as a separate entity. So for example, that X chromosome, if it receives another X chromosome, then we know that it will be male. If it receives that Y chromosome, then it will be female. Okay, so what we plan on covering today are the female sex organs. What are they intended for? So clearly the female sex organs serve as a reproductive function. We know that, but they perform other functions as well. Significant to nearly all women are the sexual parts that bring them pleasure. They may also serve to attract potential sexual partners. Because of the mutual pleasure partners give each other, we can see that sexual structures also serve an important role in human relations. So we're going to talk about the organs, physiology, and the sexual response. In this chapter, we will take a deep dive into the reproduction, how the female body can nourish the offspring, pleasure, and relationships. So this is a time where I would like for you to pause the video and just take a closer look as the embryonic fetal differentiation of the external reproductive organs, right? We can see that it is undifferentiated prior to week 6. Then week 7th or 8th, ta-da, something magical happens. You start getting different hormones, and those hormones dictate whether the embryo turns into a female or a male. So if it continues to develop as a female, as everybody is born, you can see that the glans clitoris will start to form. Labia swelling, the vulval groove will start to develop, right? The interlabial fold. If it develops into a male by that 7th or 8th week, you could see that glans penis start to form. You will see scrotal swelling. Now, by the 12th week, you can fully determine that it is a female or a male. That clitoris is usually all the way formed. The labia minora and labia majora is formed. For a male, that penis, the urethra will close, and that scrotum is completely formed. Right? So, parts of the female organs or the external structure, because most people refer to the vulva as the vagina, right? Well, the vagina is the internal structure, with the vulva is the external structure. So the sexual and reproductive organs of both men and women are usually called the genitals or the genitalia. The external female genitals are the mons pubis, the clitoris, the labia majora, and the labia minora. Collectively, we call this the vulva. And not to be confused with, which is almost always misunderstood as the vagina, which are the internal structures. The vulva are the external. Okay, the mons pubis or pubic mound. This came from the Greek word, the mound of Venus. It's a pad of fatty tissue that covers the area of the pubic bone about 6 inches below the navel. And beginning in puberty, the mons is covered with pubic hair. Because there is such a rich supply of nerve endings in the mons, caressing it, it can produce pleasure, stroking it, licking it. This all can produce great pleasure. The current practice of trimming and shaving the pubic hair has become one barometer of fashion. This has happened in probably the last couple of decades, right? Over the few years, it's become commonplace for both sexes for similar reasons. It could be aesthetically pleasing to the eye. It could also be psychosexual to look at this area of the pubic hair as shaved or completely bare, right? So the clitoris is considered the center of sexual arousal. It contains high concentration of sensory nerve endings, and it is sensitive to stimulation, especially at the tip of the shaft, the glans clitoris. So any licking, rubbing, touching of the clitoris can cause great arousal, twice as many nerve endings as the penis. So sorry, fellas, but the women got us beat on this. Its sole function is sexual arousal. The penis serves the additional functions in terms of urine, excretion, and ejaculation. So the penis is almost like a Swiss Army knife. It does all of these different things. What the clitoris' sole function is sexual arousal. So the shaft of the clitoris is both an external and internal structure. The external portion is about 1 inch long and 1/4 inch wide. So internally, the shaft is divided into 2 branches called the crura, each of which is about 3.5 inches long, which are the tips of the erectile tissue that attach to the pelvic bones. The crura contains 2 corpora cavernosa, hollow chambers that fill with blood and swell during arousal. The hidden erectile tissue of the clitoris plus the surrounding muscle tissue all contribute to muscle spasms associated during orgasms. So they contract during orgasms. All right. So now we have the labia majora. The labia majora. This is Latin for major lips. These are 2 folds of spongy flesh extending from the mons pubis and enclosing the labia minora. So inside the labia majora is the labia minora. Also housed inside the labia majora is the clitoris, the urethral opening, and the vaginal entrance. The labia minora, or minor lips, are small folds with the labia majora that meet above the clitoris to form a clitoral hood. The labia minora also enclose the urethral vaginal opening. These are smooth, hairless, and quite a bit in appearance from woman to woman. They vary from woman to woman. So the area enclosed by the labia minora is referred to as a vestibule, right? So during sexual arousal, the clitoris becomes erect. The labia minora can widen and the vestibule or the vaginal opening becomes visible, right? Because blood is flowing there during sexual arousal, okay? Signals come from the brain down to this area during sexual arousal. So within the vestibule, on either side of the vaginal opening are 2 small ducts, and we refer to this as Bartholin's glands. Another scientific term for this is vestibular glands, because it consists of vestibules. So vestibular glands or Bartholin's glands, these terms are synonymous. These secrete a small amount of moisture during sexual arousal. Okay, you are writing as I'm talking. This will all be on the test. Now, this is a diagram of the female genitalia with the labia drawn apart. This might be a good opportunity to pause the video and take a closer look. Now, the vagina. Many of these words are derived from either Latin or Greek, but the vagina is Latin. It's a Latin word for sheath. Okay, it's a flexible muscular structure that extends 3.5 inches back and upward from the vaginal opening. It is also the birth canal. through which an infant is born. It allows for menstrual flow to pass from the uterus, and it encompasses the penis or other objects during sexual expression, like sex toys. In the unaroused state, the walls of the vagina are relaxed and collapse together, but during sexual arousal, the inner two-thirds of the vagina expand while pressing from the engorgement that causes the many small blood vessels that lie in the vaginal wall to produce lubrication. In response to sexual stimulation, lubrication can occur within 10 to 30 seconds. The majority of the sensory nerve endings are concentrated in the lower third of the vagina, also known as the introitus. The introitus has the majority of the sensory nerve endings. They are concentrated in the lower third of the vagina. This part of the vagina is the most sensitive to erotic pressure and touch, the introitus. In contrast, the inner two-thirds of the vagina have virtually no nerve endings, which make it likely that a woman cannot feel a tampon when it's inserted deep in the vagina. Lubrication, which increases substantially with sexual excitement, serves several purposes. Number one, the lubrication, it increases the possibility of conception by alkalizing the normal acidic chemical balance in the vagina, thus making it more hospitable to sperm. It allows the sperm to travel, which die faster in acid environments. It can make penetration more pleasurable by reducing friction in the vaginal walls. The lubrication also helps prevent small tears in the vagina, which, if they occur, can make the vagina more vulnerable to contracting HIV. So prior to intercourse or other forms of penetration, the introitus is partially covered by a thin membrane containing a relatively large number of blood vessels. These blood vessels are called the hymen. The hymen typically has one or several perforations, allowing menstrual flow and mucus secretions to flow out of the vagina, and generally allowing for tampon insertion. In many cultures, it is or was important for a woman's hymen to be intact on her wedding day. Prior to first intercourse, the hymen may be stretched or ruptured by tampon insertion. But the woman's self-manipulation by a partner during non-coital sexual activity, by accident, or by a healthcare provider conducting a routine pelvic examination. Hymenoplasty, or a controversial procedure that reattaches the hymen to the vagina. It is now sought by some women, particularly in Muslim countries, where traditionalists place a high value on a woman's virginity, to create the illusion that they are still virgins. Hymen repair, also referred to as revirgination, may also be performed by women who have been abused or those from cultures who risk a violent reaction from their partners. An area inside surrounding the urethra is what many women report to be an erotically sensitive area, the G-spot or the Grafenberg spot. The name is derived from Ernest Grafenberg. He was a gynecologist who first discussed its erotic significance. Located on the front wall of the vagina, midway between the pubic bone and the cervix of the vaginal side of the urethra. Now you can go back and see the figure. You're going to go back and look at the diagram. This area varies in size from a small bean to a half a walnut. Now, the uterus or womb is a hollow, thick-walled muscular organ held in the pelvic cavity by a number of flexible ligaments and supported by several muscles. It is pear-shaped with a tapered end, the cervix, extended down and opening into the vagina. If a woman has not given birth, the uterus is about 3 inches long and 3 inches wide at the top. It is somewhat larger in women who have given birth. The uterus expands during pregnancy to the size of a volleyball or larger to accommodate the developing fetus. The inner lining of the uterine walls, the endometrium, is filled with tiny blood vessels. As hormonal changes occur during the monthly menstrual cycle, this tissue is built up and then shed and expelled through cervical os, the opening. Os is synonymous with opening. Unless fertilization has occurred, in the event of pregnancy, the pre-embryo is embedded in the nourishing endometrium. On each side of the uterus, held in place by several ligaments, is one of a pair of ovaries. The ovary is a gonad. an organ that produces gametes. Gametes are sex cells containing the genetic material necessary for reproduction. Female gametes are called oocytes, from the Greek word for egg and cell. Oocytes are commonly referred to as eggs or ova. Technically, however, the cell does not become an egg until it completes its final stages of division following fertilization. I have a graph that's going to show that. The ovaries are the size and shape of large almonds. In addition to producing oocytes, they serve the important function of producing hormones such as estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. At birth, the female ovaries contain about 500,000 oocytes. During childhood, many of them degenerate, then beginning in puberty and ending after menopause. A total of 400 oocytes mature and are released during a woman's reproductive years. The release of the oocyte is called ovulation. The immature oocytes are embedded in sac-like structures called ovarian follicles. The fully ripened follicle is called a vesicular or Graafian follicle. At maturation, the follicle ruptures, releasing the oocyte, and after the oocyte emerges, the ruptured follicle becomes the corpus luteum. This is Latin for yellow body. A producer of important hormones, it eventually degenerates. The egg is viable for 24 hours. So that's a lot of information to take in. Feel free to rewind the video. Feel free to look up different terms that I discussed in terms of endometrium, the ovary, the gonads, the gametes, oocytes, the ova, ovarian follicles, and especially ovulation. So at the top of the uterus are two tubes, one on each side, known as the fallopian tubes, the uterine tubes, or the oviducts. The tubes are about 4 inches long. They extend towards the ovaries but are not attached to them. Instead, the funnel-shaped end of each tube, the infundibulum, fans out like a finger-like fimbriae, which drape over the ovary but may not actually touch it. Tiny hair-like cilia on the fimbriae and the ampulla become active during ovulation. Their waving motion, along with the contractions of the walls of the tube, transports the oocyte that has been released from the ovary into the fallopian tube. Just within the infundibulum is the ampulla, the widened part of the tube in which fertilization normally occurs in sperm, and the oocyte are there at the same time. Now, there are other anatomical structures that are important. The urethra is a tube through which urine passes. The urethral opening, or meatus, is located between the clitoris and the vaginal opening. Between the vagina and the anus, the opening of the rectum through which excrement passes is a diamond-shaped region called the perineum. Now, this area of soft tissue covers the muscles and ligaments of the pelvic floor, the underside of the pelvic area extending from the top of the pubic bone above the clitoris to the anus. Okay, we're going to pause our video to check out this diagram. This is a side view of the internal female sexual structures. So take a minute to pause and look at the different areas of the female sexual structures. So this is a picture of the fallopian tubes and the ovaries. The Grafenberg spot, or the G spot. Now, some people think that the G spot is a myth, like an urban legend. Some people swear by the G spot and say that it brings great pleasure if manipulated right or rubbed against. So this is a side view of the approximate location of the G spot. This diagram also shows where the urethral opening would be in comparison to the G spot, the exit point for emission, cervix, and the pubic bone. Now, breast. Female sex organs further explain what are breasts for? The reproductive function is to nourish offspring through lactation, right? They surge as sex hormones that occurs during adolescence. The female breast begins to develop and enlarge around puberty, right? The reproductive function of the breast is to nourish through lactation or milk production, right? So a mature female breast is also known as a mammary gland. It is composed of fatty tissues and 15 to 25 lobes that radiate around a central protruding nipple. Around the nipple is a ring of darkened skin called the areola. Tiny muscles at the base of the nipple cause it to become erect in a response to touch, cold, or sexual arousal. So when a woman is pregnant, the structures within the breast undergo further development. Directly following childbirth is a response to hormonal signals. Small glands within the lobes called alveoli begin producing milk. The milk passes into ducts, each of which has a dilated region for storage. The ducts open to the outside at the nipple. During lactation, a woman's breast increases in size from enlarged glandular tissues and stored milk. And because there is little variation in the amount of glandular tissue among women, the amount of milk produced does not vary with breast size. In women who are not lactating, breast size depends mainly on fat content, which is determined by hereditary factors. Many, but not all, women find breast stimulation intensely pleasurable, whether it occurs during breastfeeding or sexual contact. This is a diagram, a frontal view of the female breast. In the diagram, it shows the areola, the nipple, the milk ducts, or mammary glands. Feel free to pause the video to look at some of these key terms and a descriptor for some of the terms that we've gone over so far in the video. Female reproductive cycle viewed as having two components. We have the ovarian cycle, during which eggs develop. We got the menstrual cycle, during which the womb is being prepared for pregnancy. The reproductive hormones, the chemical substances, serve as messengers by traveling within the body through the bloodstream. Gonadotropins are hormones that act directly on the gonads. Estrogens affect the maturation of the reproductive organs, menstruation, and pregnancy. Progesterone helps to maintain the uterine lining until menstruation occurs. Please pause the video and become familiar with some of these female sex hormones. The ovarian cycle. The development of female gametes is a complex process that begins even before a woman is born. In infancy and childhood, the cell develops into an ova. Ova is another term for eggs. During puberty, hormones trigger the completion of the process of oogenesis, literally meaning the egg beginning. I'm going to say that again. Oogenesis means the egg beginning. The oocyte, otherwise referred to as a germ cell or immature ovum, marks the status of mitosis. Mitosis is the process by which a cell duplicates the chromosome in its cell nucleus. Oogenesis results in the formation of both primary oocytes before birth and as secondary oocytes after it and as part of ovulation. This process, called the ovarian cycle or menstrual cycle, continues until a woman reaches menopause, and menopause is when the ovarian cycle stops. The ovarian cycle averages 28 days in length. Although there is considerable variation among women, ranging from 21 to 40 days, Generally, ovulation occurs in only one ovary each month, alternating between the right and the left side with each successive cycle. And a single ovary is removed. The remaining one begins to ovulate every month. The ovarian cycle has three phases: follicular, ovulatory, and luteal. Follicular, ovulatory, and luteal. Now pause the video and look at the oogenesis and how the egg goes from 46 chromosome and splits to 23 chromosomes, right? Through a process of what starts off as mitosis, then develops into meiosis 1, and then the last stage is meiosis 2, where the polar body starts to degenerate. This is another area to pause in which it shows the menstrual cycle, the different stages of it, from the uterine lining beginning to slough off and pass out of the body through the cervix and the vagina, and how the uterine lining begins to renew. Next phase is the uterine lining begins to thicken, and the oocyte is released into the fallopian tube, right? That oocyte travels through the tube, and the remaining cells of the follicle develop into the corpus luteum. The lining continues to thicken. These are the phases of the menstrual cycle. Now let's talk about the menstrual cycle. As hormone levels decrease following the degeneration of the corpus luteum, the uterine lining or the endometrium is shed because it will not be needed to help sustain the fertilized ovum. This is what happened when that egg is fertilized. The shedding of the endometrial tissue and the bleeding that accompanies it is collectively a monthly event in the lives of women from puberty all the way through menopause. Cultural and religious attitudes, as well as a personal experience, influence our feelings about this phenomenon. While pads and panty liners are used outside the body, tampons are placed inside the vagina for a wide variety of reasons, including environmental concerns, comfort, chemical residues, the toxic shock syndrome. This is a bacterial infection that can occur in menstruating women and cause a person to go into shock. Women are turning to alternative means for catching menstrual flow. Now, the menstrual cycle or uterine cycle is divided into three phases: the menstrual, proliferative, and the secretory. With hormone levels low because of degeneration of the corpus luteum, the outer layer of the endometrium becomes detached from the uterine wall. The shedding of the endometrium marks the beginning of the menstrual phase. This endometrial tissue, along with the mucus, other cervical and vaginal secretions, and a small amount of blood, 2 to 5 ounces per cycle, is expelled through the vagina. The menstrual flow, or menses, generally occur over a period of 3 to 5 days. So, a girl's first menstruation is known as the menarche. We refer to the menarche as the first sighting of menstruation. The proliferative phase lasts about 9 days. Proliferative phase lasts 9 days, but during this time, the endometrium thickens in response to increased estrogen. The mucous membranes of the cervix secrete a clear, thin mucus with a crystalline structure that facilitates the passage of sperm. The proliferative phase ends with ovulation. During the first part of the secretory phase, with the help of progesterone, the endometrium begins to prepare for the arrival of a fertilized ovum. The secretory phase lasts 14 days, corresponding with the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. It ends with shedding of the endometrium, as the previous graphic displayed. To rewind the video to look at the graphic, and it showed a really good visual of this cycle. Again, pause the video. Figure 9 demonstrates the menstrual cycle, the ovarian cycle, and hormone levels as they go up and down. The luteinizing hormone, and that has peaks the sex drive around the 14th day. The follicular hormone also peaks around 13th or 14th days, right? You can look at the various level of the testosterone and estrogen and progesterone as they kind of go up and down throughout the cycle. Now, a collection of physical, emotional, and psychological changes can happen during the menstrual cycle, and they occur 7 to 14 days before a woman's menstrual period. This is known as premenstrual syndrome, okay, or PMS. These symptoms disappear soon after the start of menstrual bleeding. Though no one knows for sure what causes PMS, it seems to be linked to alterations in the levels of sex hormones and brain chemicals or neurotransmitters. While some doctors equate premenstrual dysphoric disorder to PMS, others use a less stringent definition of PMS, which includes mild to moderate symptoms. Symptoms of PMS fall into 2 categories: physical symptoms, which may include bloating, breast tenderness, swelling and weight gain, headaches, cramping, migraine headaches, and food cravings. The psychological and emotional symptoms, which include fatigue, depression, irritability, crying, and changes in the libido. And that essentially means fluctuating levels of not wanting to have sex. At some point in the menstrual life, nearly every woman experiences heavy or prolonged bleeding during her menstrual cycle, and this is also known as menorrhagia. Although heavy menstrual bleeding is common among most women, only a few experience blood loss severe enough for it to be defined as menorrhagia. Excessive or prolonged menstrual bleeding can lead to iron deficiency, anemia, and other medical conditions. Thus, it is advisable for women with this problem to seek medical care and treatment. While menstrual cramps are experienced by some women before or during their periods, a more persistent aching a serious pain sufficient to limit a woman's activity is called dysmenorrhea. There are two types of dysmenorrhea. Primary dysmenorrhea is associated with and diagnosable pelvic condition. It is characterized by pain that begins with or just below the uterine bleeding when there is absence of pain in other times in the cycle. It could be very severe and may be accompanied by nausea, weakness, or other physical symptoms. In secondary dysmenorrhea, the symptoms may be the same, but there's an underlying condition or disease causing them. Pain may not be limited to the menstrual phase alone. Secondary dysmenorrhea may be caused by pelvic inflammatory disease or PID, endometriosis, endometrial cancer, or other conditions that should be treated right away. And there's a general taboo in our culture, as in many others, against sexual intercourse during menstruation. This taboo is based on religious or cultural beliefs. Among Orthodox Jews, for example, women are required to refrain from intercourse for 7 days following the end of the menstruation. They may then resume sexual activity after a ritual bath. This ritual bath is called the mikvah. Okay, that's for Orthodox Jews. Young adults who are comfortable with menstrual sex saw it as just another part of committed intimate relationship. It is important to note that although it is unusual, conception can occur during menstruation. A woman can still get pregnant during her period. Now we're going to talk about some sexual responses. The ways in which individuals respond to sexual arousal are highly varied. Like women's sexuality through typically thought as personal or individual is significantly influenced by social groups to which women belong. Sociocultural variables include gender, religious preference, class, educational attainment, age, marital status, race, and ethnicity. For many women, gender, the social and cultural characteristics associated with being male or female, is probably the most influential variable in shaping their sexual desires, behaviors, and partnership. Because gender is largely defined by cultural expectation, Women's sexual experiences must be understood in terms of cultural and political and relational forces. So this is also speaking to the different types of models. Of course, we know Williams, Masters, and Virginia Johnson. They came up with the 4-phase model of sexual response: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. But the Kaplan had a three-step model, or a triphastic model of sexual response, where they do not include the plateau phase. Okay. A third, but much less known pattern is Luland's sexual response model, which incorporates both the biological and affective components into a 6-stage cycle. Beyond any questions of similarities and differences in the female and the male sexual response cycle is the more significant issue of variation in how individuals experience each phase. To help organize our thinking about complexities of human behavior, the dual control model provides a theoretical perspective of sexual response that is based on brain function and the interaction between sexual excitation. Okay, so critical thinking. There still is much debate about whether or not women actually have a G-spot. What is the G-spot and why is its presence so debated? Find a website that describes a G-spot and take a position on whether or not it exists. This is my challenge to people that are listening and watching this video. Now, this website might actually be the same one, but if it takes the opposite position, what do you think? Okay, so this graph is also showing Masters and Johnson response in terms of the uterus being elevated during sex, how the clitoris becomes engorged with blood, the labia minora and majora swell, the upper parts of the vagina expands to receive that sexual toy, finger, and or penis, right? The vaginal wall forms orgasmic platforms. It begins to contract. The labia deepens. The clitoris withdraws under the clitoral hood. The clitoral hood, when unaroused, is not filled with color. It's not that dark purple, right? But the clitoral shaft will begin to swell. The labia minora, they deepen in color. The Bartholin gland starts to secrete a small amount of fluid, right? So that vagina is becoming excited, it's becoming moist. That Bartholin's glands is secreting fluid. This is happening, right? That excitement, that brain is sending hormones to the vagina, and the vagina is responding in a way to receive that penis, finger, or sex toy. Contractions in the uterus. This is what happens during the orgasmic phase. Rhythmic contractions in the vagina. That rectal sphincter muscles start to contract. There's a small seminal pool, right? Orgasmic platforms start to disappear. This is the resolution phase. Okay, in the orgasm phase is right before the resolution phase. Okay, that clitoris returns to the unaroused position and the unaroused color. Okay, that's a breakdown. Now, the libido, which is your sex drive in both men and women, is biologically influenced by the hormone called testosterone. In men, testosterone is produced mainly in the testes, and in women, it is produced in the adrenal glands and the ovaries. Although women produce much less testosterone than men, this does not mean that they have less sexual interest. Apparently, women are much more sensitive than men in testosterone effects through testosterone decreases in women as they age. Right, the ovaries manufacture it throughout the life. So oxytocin is a hormone more commonly associated with contractions during labor and breastfeeding. It's also increased by nipple stimulation in men and women. The neurotransmitter, which has also been linked to bonding, is released in variable amounts in men and women during orgasm and remains raised for at least 5 minutes after the orgasm. It helps us feel connected and promotes touch, affection, and relaxation. In any case, for women, one of the first signs of sexual excitement is the seeping of moisture through the vaginal walls through a process called vaginal transudation or sweating. Blood causes lymphatic fluids to push through the vaginal walls, engorging them, lubricating the vagina, and enabling it to encompass the penis or a sex toy or a finger. The upper 2/3 of the vagina expand in a process called tenting. The vagina expands about an inch in length and doubles its width. These signs do not occur on a specific timetable. Each woman has her own pattern of arousal, which may vary under different conditions, with different partners and so on. So many women and men experience what's called a sex flush, a darkening of the skin or a rash that temporarily appears. This intense coloring is sometimes referred to as the sex skin. When it appears, orgasm is imminent. Meanwhile, the vagina opening in the lower third of the vagina decreases in size as they become more congested with blood. This thickening of the walls, which occurs in the plateau stage of the sexual response cycle, is called the orgasmic platform. Orgasm. Now, orgasm, the definition is a peak sensation of intense pleasure that creates an altered state of consciousness. And orgasms, the length of orgasm, the intensity of orgasm vary from person to person, accompanied by involuntary rhythmic uterine and anal contractions. Myotonia and a state of well-being and contentment. Some people describe it as zen-like, a transcendental state in which the body is just encompassed with a kind of euphoria. And orgasms are different depending on the person. So we went deep into sex organs, what they are for, the physiological responses, and the female sexual response. Now, I have been talking for the last 40 minutes, and it is time for us to kind of just do a quick recap, look at your notes and see anything that was left uncertain or unsure. We could always go back in the video. We can always use our internet to Google some things that we might be some unclear about, or we could use our textbooks. So be on the lookout for those questions, and some of those key terms that we talked about in this video are going to be on the quiz. So as always, this is Professor Robert Alexander.